the sound of the fish. Like, what is that?
Well, it sounds like a bunch of dentist drills, but because we didn't have a lot of money, we knew that one of the main things in making people believe in the piranhas was to have good sound effects. And so we had some guys who eventually went on to work for Star Wars and Spielberg and all that kind of stuff, but were just starting out. And they came up with a whole lot of electronic effects that were kind of new. And they mixed them in with real sounds of real animals and roars of lions and, you know, all that kind of stuff. And it was, I couldn't tell you, I couldn't pull out the specific sounds, but I know it was a melange of a bunch of different stuff, and it was done very carefully, actually, because, as I said, it was a cheapo picture. And we really tried to do the best with what we had, and it had good sound. Hello.
Hello. Thank you for joining us here this weekend.
Thank you for letting me join you.
Oh, no. You let us invite you over here, all that fun stuff. So thank you so much for being here. I just want to say that this is a real treat, and I'll just get this off right away. On behalf of myself and our whole audiences, I just want to thank you. I want to thank you for your talents. I want to thank you for your professionalism. I want to thank you for all the projects you have given us throughout your career. You have, because you started out, and we'll talk about this a little bit too, you started as a fan. You were one of us, and you got to the other side, and you kept that mentality. And I've always appreciated your work, because I feel like you were one of us from this side of the bubble, and you got on the other side, and you made stuff for us that also translated into the general audiences. And thank you for that.
Well, I still am a fan.
I know, you still are, yeah. You still are. So let's go back for anybody that may not know, because what I know about it is rather fascinating. Let's go into the origin story. What kind of pulled you into this? I know originally you had an interest in animation and cartooning, and then that pivoted over into film?
Well, when I was a kid, I really loved cartoons, comic books, Carl Barks, you know, anything. I read all the Uncle Scrooge comics backward and forward. And I wanted to be a cartoonist, so I did my own little cartoons and little short, phony little films with cartoons in them. And basically, when it came time to go to college, I thought, well, I'll go to art school where I can, you know, be a cartoonist. Now, when I got to the Philadelphia College of Art, they told me, well, cartooning is not an art, so pick something else. And so they were just starting their burgeoning film class with like 40 students and 2 cameras. And they said, well, do that. And I thought, well, yeah, okay, I could do that because I can storyboard it. It's kind of like comic books. And so I started to get into, you know, film, but not really seriously. I got a job on a magazine. I was a film critic, saw a lot of movies, wrote about a lot of movies. But I never really thought that I would actually make movies. Because when I was younger, I went to see Lord of the Flies at a theater, and I counted the shots. And I realized when I got to 100 that this is something I could never do because my math skills were very poor, and I could never. If there's 100 of anything, I can't do it. But then, as it turned out, I got a chance to go to Hollywood, and a friend of mine got a job with Roger Corman, and he brought me out to do trailers. So I had to learn to edit. I had to learn to edit on a Moviola, and which was very interesting. But I learned a lot of things about making movies by making trailers, because when you make trailers, you have to take scenes and cut them down to their essentials. And you can realize that, you know, here's an angle you didn't need, and here's another angle you didn't need, because you can put these pieces together and it still makes sense. And then you use that kind of knowledge when you actually end up on a film set. And when you're under the gun, and these movies are made very cheaply and quickly, and so the idea was that you had to get as many shots in the can as possible. And being an editor, you always knew which ones you didn't need, because you had already seen how things worked editorially, and that led to my being a movie director. I wouldn't say under protest, but it was certainly a surprise to me because I was a pretty, editors are people who, live in darkness and don't really see very many people, and it's kind of solitary. But movies are bustling and hustling, and there's lots of people involved and lots of opinions. And I found that I really enjoyed that part of it. I really liked the idea that there were a lot of people cross-pollinating ideas. And so I made my first picture, which was a movie called Hollywood Boulevard, which was a sex comedy for Roger Corman in the model of the teachers and nurses movies that he'd been making, where the teachers and nurses have adventures and take their clothes off. They decided, well, we'll do it with the starlets, because then we can make a really cheap picture using our crew as the actors and using footage from other movies that we've been using for trailers. And so we made this kind of movie that, in retrospect, when seen now, is like a kind of a documentary about how those low-budget movies were made in the 70s. And that led me to discover that I did enjoy the directing part. And that basically led to me saying, okay, that's what I'm going to do.
First of all, I'm perennially amazed at just how many people of your generation was influenced by Karl Barks, and just how many fans that there were. And long story, Uncle Scrooge, Karl Barks, look it up and read them. They're wonderful. So it's like yourself and several other ones. Were you ever disappointed when you grabbed an issue and it wasn't a Karl Barks story?
Karl Barks, not Karl Marx.
Karl Barks.
Karl Marx had a different agenda.
No, Karl Barks. Sorry,
Karl
Barks.
I could tell
I'll
the
talk
difference.
clearer.
Barks was considered the good artist, and everybody else was okay, but it's not the same. And Barks also wrote his own stories, and they were based on all sorts of legends and stuff, and it was kind of educational in a weird way, and it was a kind of comic book that I really liked.
Yeah, absolutely. Talk a little bit about some of your works. I know everybody's going to have lots of questions about that, so I'll just go into some of my personal favorites. Innerspace, I feel, is wonderful and kind of undervalued. I think it's one of Martin Short's best performances, and is Robert Picardo's funniest, in my opinion. Just real briefly, what's your take on that?
Well, the part that Bob Picardo plays in that picture couldn't be done today. It would definitely not pass muster, but it is hilarious. Innerspace was a movie that I made because I had just made a picture called Explorers, which was a tremendous disaster financially. And I thought, well, I've got to start. A friend of mine, after seeing Explorers, said to me, you've got to stop making movies just for us, meaning the fans. And so I said, okay, I'm going to make something I think is commercial. And when Innerspace came down the pike, it was like, well, this is like Fantastic Voyage with spies and comedies. And I thought, well, that sounds like it would be commercial. And so I embarked on making that picture. And by the time it was done and I looked at it, it was just as wacky and weird and personal as my other movies. And so it turned out great. I mean, I thought it was a wonderful picture, and I had a wonderful time making it. The cast was terrific. But unfortunately, they couldn't figure out a good title, because Innerspace was also the same title as the Monsanto ride at Disneyland. So that was confusing. And also, they didn't sell it as a comedy. They sold it as sort of a hardware movie with a giant thumb on the poster with a tiny little pod on the top, and no pictures of the cast. And it opened to empty theaters. I mean, it was the crickets chirped everywhere the picture opened. Although at the preview, they had this great preview, and the audience was like, everybody, and Warner Brothers thought, this is great, we've got this big hit coming. And it didn't come. And they believed, to be fair to the studio, they believed in the movie, and they even revamped the advertising campaign and tried to re-release it a couple of months later, and it still bombed. But what happened was, when it finally came out on video, it was the first VHS letterboxed, and suddenly people discovered it, and they started to tell their friends about it, and they started to hand the video around. And today, people who see Innerspace think, boy, this must have been a big hit. I mean, everybody's seen it, they all like it. It wasn't, it was a disaster.
So, that VHS market, it gave that second wave, and it was that first wave of that discovery of stuff that, didn't do what it should have done, unfortunately. But the effects, I just watched it again recently. The effects still hold up tremendously.
Academy Award-winning effects.
Yes, absolutely.
Closest to an Academy Award I'll ever get.
Yeah. Not yet. I was still young. Speaking about stuff that you said for us, Matinee, the cinematic love letter to, yes. Love letter
That's
to
about as
Castle.
many people as saw it when it was new.
But that just looked like there's a lot of heart and a lot of love in that film, I think.
It is. Matinee is sort of a love letter to movies, and particularly, movies like William Castle's movies, and it was a labor of love, and it was made through a fluke because we had the money from overseas and we started shooting, and then the money started not arriving, and we had a distribution deal with Universal, and we had to say to the studio, would you please pay the cash flow this week because the other money hasn't come in. Then it became apparent that the money wasn't coming in, and we had to go to Universal and say, well, you guys have already invested a certain amount of money in this picture. Why don't you just buy the whole thing? And they did, reluctantly, because it wasn't really the kind of movie that they knew how to sell. And I remember the thing that the head of the studio said when he saw the picture. He said, this is a nice movie, but how am I going to sell it? And they never really quite figured that out. But it was the kind of movie that, even though it was not a success when it was new, again, picked up a lot of steam by people seeing it, on video and telling their friends. And I am only one of a number of filmmakers whose work in the 80s is unfairly deemed to be very successful, because in fact a lot of the pictures that we made were not successful at the box office at all, and yet they're very well known and even beloved today by people who have no idea how difficult it was for us to endure the failures of these movies over and over and over. But it was a tough time, and there were a lot of good movies made that people didn't go see. And as I think has probably always been true. But the great thing about the movies is that they're there. They last. And now, today, we have access to more movies than ever in my lifetime. And even in better prints and better quality, because they've gone back to the original negatives and stuff. And it's really a wonderful time to be a film buff if you have somebody who can point you toward things that you probably might have missed or didn't know existed, and which is why I started Trailers from Hell, which is my website, where we have filmmakers commenting on trailers from movies that they think you should know about and think you should see. And here's an artist you should see, or an actor, or a director, or a writer, and if you like his stuff, then you should see this and this and this. And that's sort of how you build your film knowledge.
And I did mention that earlier, and yes, Trailers from Hell is a wonderful resource. It's a great primer. I've shown it to, my friends. Hey, my friend's kid wants to get into filmmaking. That's one of the first things I send them. It's like, definitely go through this, and I love the format of talking over it, and it's during the trailer. I love the encapsulation. It's just a great way. It whets the appetite in both levels. You're watching the trailer, and a very luminary such as yourself and Landis and so many of these other guys say, oh, this is a great movie. I love that too. It's just a great thing, and thank you for that. Do we have any fans of Trailers from Hell? All right.
I have a podcast too.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Got a whole bunch of stuff going on. I know it wasn't the best experience for you, but I'll just say this. This isn't even a question. I'll just say it. Thank you for Looney Tunes back in action. I, too, was dissatisfied by the basketball movie, I'll call it. And I thought there was a lot of points that were missed. And I think you really tried to get it back on a correct track. And you gave us a Dalek on widescreen. So thank you for that. And what I think I want to say, too, you've worked with so many wonderful actors. A lot of them at points where maybe you could say like they weren't getting the roles that they used to, like Keenan Wynn, for example, on Piranha, an actor I absolutely adore. What was your experience like with him?
Well, Keenan worked for I think one day, because the idea at that time was if you're going to make a low-budget picture, you could always make money if you could sell it to television. And so they would get you, there was a thing called TVQ, and that was a list of all the actors whose names were familiar to people who read TV Guide. And so if you could get some of those actors onto in your movie and on the poster, that was a selling point to get the movie successful on television. And Keenan worked for one day. And he was he was a great guy, really interesting, deaf as a post, because he was a motorcycle rider. And when he was far away from me, he'd say, "You better yell loud because I can't hear you." And we buried him to his waist so that we could have fake Rob Bottin legs sticking out that were piranha eaten. And like all the classic actors that I've worked with, they're so full of stories, and they're so glad that you know who they are. I've had actors come in for readings, and I've said, "Oh, I like this, and this is my favorite picture," and I don't care. I'll do the movie, because they're so used to going into readings with directors who didn't know who they were and didn't care, and so I built some really great relationships because of that.
Kevin McCarthy's not one of my favorites.
You mean the real Kevin McCarthy, not that phony in Washington who stole his name.
You're in great danger. That one, the real one. Can't wait to. And we talked about Innerspace again. It's a wonderful cast. And of course, you worked with Christopher Lee on what I think is one of the greatest sequels of all time, Gremlins 2. And thank you for that. Fans of that one? And I know they've been pestering you for a while to do a sequel to Gremlins. And how did you sell them on the, I'll do it, I got to do it my way?
Well, the problem was nobody expected anything from the original Gremlins movie. The studio didn't understand it. They didn't like it. And they were astounded when they had this great preview. And it was like, oh my God, this looks like it might make money. And then it went out and it did make a lot of money. And then they immediately wanted another one, even though they didn't know what they had just made. But I was so exhausted from working with these damn puppets. I mean, it was really exhausting. And I said, no, I can't do it. I'll just get somebody else. And they did try to get somebody else for about 4 more years to make another Gremlins movie. But since they didn't understand what made the first one work, it was very difficult for them to duplicate it. And so finally they came back to me and they said, well, we really want this picture this summer, and if you'll do another Gremlins movie, we'll let you do whatever you want. And I decided that what I wanted to do was to deconstruct the idea of making a sequel to Gremlins, because the world didn't need one. And so we made a movie that was a kind of a parody of the first movie and sort of a introduction to what the 90s were going to be like, and which was pretty crazy. And they were true to their word. They left me alone. I got to do as many crazy things that I wanted to do in the movie. And it was a very satisfying experience. Unfortunately, they waited a little long to do the sequel, as the Ghostbusters people did also. They waited a little too long for their sequel. And so it cost more, 3 times the original movie. And of course, it didn't make enough money, so it was considered a disappointment. But over the years, again, it's become much more popular.
Absolutely. Has there been any traction on the Roger Corman biopic you wanted to do?
No, I've been trying to get a movie made about Roger Corman making the trip for about 10, 15 years, and it doesn't look like it's any closer now to getting made than it was before. We came very close at one point, but it just didn't happen.
Can we do a Kickstarter to help you with that?
Yeah, we've already done that.
Okay. Can we do another one? So we do. What's the best advice you would give now to anyone that wants to get in, maybe not into the film business, but just films creatively?
Well, I get that question a lot, and of course, everything has changed exponentially from the time, the business that I knew, the movies that I knew when I started in the 70s. It's completely obsolete. And kids say, so how did you get your start? And I say, I could tell you how I got my start, but it is completely meaningless to you because those avenues are not around anymore. It's not even film, it's digital. And the way that you see the movies often isn't in a movie theater. It's on streaming or your computer, or try to watch Lawrence of Arabia on your watch. I mean, it doesn't work that way. So it's all changed. And so the only thing I can say is to take advantage of the technology that exists now, which we didn't have. We had to shoot in clunky 16 millimeter and send it to the lab and bring it back and buy splicers and splicing tape and all that kind of stuff. You don't have to do that anymore. You can do all this stuff on your computer. And you can, if you have friends, get together, write something, do something, you make a short, and then the question is, well, I made my short and I like it. Well, now what do I do with it? Well, getting people to see it is almost as difficult as getting to make it. And one of the best routes is if you can get it into any kind of film festival. If it's a horror film festival, that's even better because those people are very loyal to what they see. And the chances are that you're going to get noticed, and maybe somebody will want to either turn it into a feature or hire you for something else. But it's the best way, I think, to get in, because you've got to get noticed. And of course, there's YouTube. I mean, you could put it up on YouTube, but that doesn't mean anybody's going to watch it, because there's 250,000 other things to watch on YouTube. But if you have something in hand that you've done, you will have learned something making it, even if you've only learned from your mistakes. But you've actually gone through the process of doing it. And I think that's more important than anything else. You can dream in your bedroom at night about making movies, but if you don't actually go out and try to do it, you'll never get anywhere.
Thank you. And my last one, then I'll turn over to our audience. What's a comfort movie for you? What's a movie that you never get tired of watching?
Well, there's a lot, actually.
Yeah.
There's a lot. I mean,
I wasn't presuming there was only one, but
anything on Turner Classic Movies is comfort for me. Well, I get comfort from watching the old Universal horror pictures, which I saw first when I was a kid, and of course my entire generation was exposed to those movies on television with commercials, and often a horror host making fun of them. But those experiences stayed with us. And also, I was a very big fan of giant insect movies in the 50s. There were Atomic Fear movies, and so when I came to make Matinee, I decided I wanted to channel my affection for those movies into a fake movie called Mant. Half man, half ant, all terror. And so I just as soon put on a giant grasshopper movie as anything else.
And you shot a lot for Mant. I know it didn't make it the final cut, but I know I've seen some of the extras and stuff like that. That looked like it was a real hoot.
It was a lot of fun. We shot it before we shot the rest of the movie. And when we hired John Goodman to play the lead, I said, this character is sort of based on William Castle, and I gave him a whole bunch of trailers from William Castle. He said, I don't need to see those. What do you think I spent my youth? I saw all those movies when they were new.
Did you see 13 Ghosts in the theater?
I saw it in the theater with the Ghost
glass,
Viewer.
yeah.
The Ghost Viewer was one of the more odd gimmicks because it wasn't like 3D. Everybody thought it was 3D, but it wasn't, just because it had a red gel and a blue gel. But what it did is if you didn't want to see the ghosts, you put up the blue gel, and if you did want to see the ghosts, you put the red gel, or vice versa. And the idea of not wanting to see the ghosts just, I didn't get it. Why would anybody want to go to the movie and not see the ghosts? So that wasn't my favorite gimmick. My favorite gimmick was Mr. Sardonicus, where he actually gave the audience the impression that they could decide the end of the movie without actually having shot anything other than the movie that he released. Because he'd come out and he'd count. He'd say, "Hold up your cards," and he'd say 1, 2, and he'd count. And he goes, "No, who wants to see him punished?" Oh, well, guess he's going to be punished. Well, that's all they shot. Of course he's going to be punished. Brilliant.
I demand a recount. That was it too. Oh, you mentioned horror hosts. What was your horror host growing up?
Oh, I had Zachary.
Zachary.
John Zachary, who was started in Philadelphia and then went to New York, and he was really the model for a lot of those. But we still have them. And Svengoolie is doing very well.
Absolutely. And tomorrow, if you're interested in horror hosting, we're doing a panel on that. Who wants to be a horror host? And come and check that out. In the meantime, Again, thank you for indulging my capricious curiosity. I will turn it over to our audience. I'm going to jump right over on here, and whoever wants to start us off, we'll get 2 pieces of candy. Ha! How about that? I'll bribe you. All right, come on up. Hi, what's your name?
Ed.
Ed, what do you want to know, Ed?
So you were a fan of Chuck Jones. How did you end up getting him in your movies?
I met Chuck Jones at Telluride, at the Telluride Film Festival, and I'd always been a fan, of course, and we got along really well. And when it came to do Gremlins, I thought, since the lead kid wanted to be a cartoonist, I said, well, let's put him in the bar scene and put Chuck Jones there, and he can get lessons from Chuck Jones. And that led to Chuck appearing in a whole bunch of my other movies, in Innerspace, and then eventually doing titles for Gremlins 2. And Chuck is the main reason I did Looney Tunes Back in Action, because he had seen the basketball movie and wasn't fond of it at all. And he thought that the characters were not portrayed accurately. And so when I was offered Looney Tunes Back in Action, which was a not very good script, I took it because I felt that I needed to be able to follow in Chuck's footsteps in keeping the characters true to who they really were. And he had recently passed away. And so I thought, okay, I'll do this for Chuck.
Thank you. Great question. Here you go. Wearing a man shirt, proper, right on. What's your name?
Charles. Just curious to know your 4 favorite films all time.
My what?
Your 4 all-time favorite films.
4 all-time favorite films. Oh, come on. If you ask me that in 10 minutes, it'll be 4 different movies. There are movies there's hundreds of movies that I love. Of the ones that just come to mind, I would say Touch of Evil. I would say Once Upon a Time in the West. I would say Harvey. And I would say The Tomb of Ligeia.
Ooh, thank you, brother. Good question. Hi, what's your name?
I'm Brandy.
Brandy, what do you want to know?
All right, so we have a local TV channel. We still have an antenna at our house. Not many people do, but we have a local channel called Comet, and it is a sci-fi and horror channel. And yeah, great. Piranha was on the other night, actually. And so I was wondering, it was the first time I noticed it, the sound of the fish. Were you involved with that sound effect? Like, what is that?
Well, it sounds like a bunch of dentist drills, but because we didn't have a lot of money, we knew that one of the main things in making people believe in the piranhas was to have good sound effects. And so we had some guys who eventually went on to work for Star Wars and Spielberg and all that kind of stuff, but were just starting out. And they came up with a whole lot of electronic effects that were kind of new. And they mixed them in with real sounds of real animals and roars of lions and all that kind of stuff. And I couldn't tell you, I couldn't pull out the specific sounds, but I know it was a melange of a bunch of different stuff, and it was done very carefully, actually, because, as I said, it was a cheapo picture, and we really tried to do the best with what we had, and it had good sound.
Great question. Thank you. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Are
Hi,
you,
what's
are
your
you
name?
are you giving them free passes?
I'm giving him candy.
Ah.
Yes. Hey, what's your name?
My name's David. Hi, I was going across your catalog and I noticed the movie Orgy. What was the inspiration behind that?
Well, the movie Orgy, which has not been, for a long time was not seen anywhere because there was only one print, was a movie that was put together by me and John Davison, who produced RoboCop later, not then. He was a high school student then. There was a Batman serial that was re-released in 1966, and they took all 15 chapters and they ran it at art houses. And it was very telling because, first of all, any time you spend that much time in a movie, you get a little ditzy while you're watching it. And we got to see the cheats in the chapters, where they fake, at the end of one chapter he gets run over by a train, and then at the beginning of the next chapter he rolls away. Wait, they didn't show us that. But supposedly after a week, the kids weren't supposed to remember. But also it was a very racist serial because it was done in 1943, and it was, the Japanese villain is there's phrases like "you're as yellow as your skin," that kind of stuff, and that was kind of interesting because it sort of gave us a little line into what our parents were thinking and had been thinking during that time. Anyway, I thought we were film collectors and we had some serials, and we thought, well, we can do our own show. We could do our own serials, and we could intersperse it with scenes from other movies and cartoons and newsreels and whatever. And we ran it at the Philadelphia College of Art, and it was quite successful. And it eventually snowballed into a 7-hour movie that we would take around to campuses. And the Schlitz Beer Company would give us money because they like to sell beer. And the stoneder you were, the better the movie was. And it took all the things that people had seen when they were kids, which they hadn't seen forever because it was pre-internet. And oh my God, it's Tales of the Texas Rangers. I haven't seen that since I was 5, And so it became very popular on college campuses. Then I went to Roger Corman and to work, and I couldn't, because we had to take it around personally to all the campuses to show it. And we had to change the focus and raise the sound, because it was all splices. It was hundreds of splices of different pieces of film. But lately, the American Genre Film Archive has made a DCP of it, which they now show around the country if anybody wants to book it. The trick is that the audience has to be let in for free, because I don't own any of the things that are in the movie, and some of them I don't even know what they are. And so they said, okay, we'll do that. And so it's been running. If you request it and you get a theater that can run it, it now currently only runs 5 hours, but that's enough. And it's been quite successful. And if you look it up on IMDb, there's a lot of analyses of it and stuff.
Great question. Thank you. Hey, what's your name?
Cole. So I'm glad we're talking about inner space. In fact, in this room is the most I've ever heard of inner space discussed, and I'm here for it. That movie, like you said, it's a comedy, and it has this amazing comedic rhythm between these two leads. They're really never on screen together until the very last scene. Did they ever have on-set communication? Because it's Dennis Quaid sitting there chilling in that pod the whole time, but the rhythm is so important. So how did you foster that on-set?
The reason that picture works, I think, is because of the relationship between the two characters. And it was obviously pretty daunting to think that we were going to pre-record everything that one character said and then play it back for the other character. And so we came up with an idea, a technology that allowed the actors to always be together, even if they weren't on screen. So when we would be shooting Marty Short, hearing things in his ear, Dennis would be on the set saying those things. And when Dennis was in the pod listening to Marty Short, we would pre-record some of the visuals, but for the most part, he would also be there to talk, and so they would ad-lib. And they have this give-and-take relationship that they could never have had if we hadn't figured out a way to get them both together. So as you say, they're never on screen until the very end of the movie together, but in fact, they were together every time one of them is on screen, the other one was sitting in the wings talking to him.
Great. Thank you. Hey, what's your name?
Jake. Jake, what do you want to know? Do you have any memories of working with Brother Theodore in The Burbs?
Brother Theodore. Yes. When it came time to cast that part in The Burbs, we saw a lot of people. We saw Timothy Carey. We saw a lot of really interesting actors. But there was something about Brother Theodore, who I was familiar with from watching him on television. He used to do late-night TV shows. But he also had a show in New York that was a sort of a one-man show that was very dark and bleak, and he had a persona that he had created for himself. He was unique, and there was nobody like him, and we thought, this is the guy to play this part. And so even though another actor who was deaf as a post, I mean, he really couldn't hear anything. And sometimes the actors would have to talk really loud and put his cue line loud so that he would know what he was doing. But he was a remarkable guy. He had a very dark background. It was the war, and he had a lot of stuff going on. But he was a lovely man, and I wish I'd been able to spend more time with him because we had a person who sort of took care of him and made sure he was okay, and spent a lot of time with him. But I couldn't because I'm doing other stuff, and that's the one regret I have about all the movies that I've made is I've worked with all these great people, Slim Pickens, John Carradine, all these people, and they all have these hundreds of great stories, and I'm too busy making the movie to sit there and hear the stories. So on The Howling, I started doing the slates so that I could get John Carradine to start telling one story. And then if he couldn't finish it, I'd say, hold that, and we'd do the scene, and I'd do another take just to get to hear the end of the story. But I did manage to get some stories.
Great. Cool here too for being a Brother Theodore fan. He's kind of making a resurgence. The past year, people have been discovering him for the first time. So his star is starting to glow again. So right on. A cool shirt, by the way. Hey, what's your name?
My name is Garrett. The Gremlins rag is just as iconic as the film itself. I was just curious if you could share a little bit about working with Jerry Goldsmith and how you came about deciding what the score sound would be like, not just for Gremlins, but all your films.
Well, I've always thought that Jerry was largely responsible for whatever success I've had in Hollywood because every movie that I made got so much better when he put the music on. And in the case of the Gremlins rag, I had done Twilight Zone movie with him and then decided to hire him for Gremlins. And he played me the Gremlins rag on the piano. And I thought, this sounds like circus music. It sounds like it should be played on a calliope or something. Because I hadn't really realized the difference between what you hear on the piano and what you hear when it's orchestrated, because I was just starting out. But he said, no, trust me. I think this will work. I think you'll like it. And of course, it's iconic. I mean, it's great, and he was great. He was one of the few geniuses I've ever actually known personally.
Great question. Thank you. Hi, what's your name?
Victor. Victor, what do you want to know? Over your career, you've had a lot of really great actors in your films. How much have you actually come away with from them? How much have they taught you as a director?
I think I missed the end of that.
How much did they teach you when you were making your films with all these great actors that you had?
How much did they teach me?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, my relationship with actors was also based on how many movies I had seen them in before I worked with them. So I really like actors. I always liked actors, and because they're the ambassadors of your movie. They're the things that people are watching. This is how you're getting your movie across, is by the performances of the actors. And all the actors I've worked with have been different. And some have been into the method and some have been into other things. But the thing that you really learn when you work with actors is you learn patience, which you have to have in order to be able to get the best out of people. And then you have to learn that there are some actors who like to do take after take after take and get better and better, but that's not fair to the other actors in the scene because they may have already hit their peak in the first or second take. So it becomes a sort of a balancing act of what's more important to the scene, which character is more important to the scene, and also once you're done, are both actors happy and satisfied with what they've done? Because if you leave a scene and the actor isn't satisfied, it doesn't bode well for the next scene that you have to do with the actor. To me, one of the reasons to get up in the morning to make movies was to see the actors in the morning, because they're the backbone of the movie.
Cool. Great question. Thank you. Hey, what's your name?
My name's Tucker. So Gremlins growing up was one of my favorite movies as a kid, and when I learned more about the behind the scenes information and the goings on there, I learned that it could have been and was really originally intended to be a lot darker, with Billy's mother going to die, originally the dog getting killed, and one of my favorites was learning about how the animatronic Gizmo led to a list being made of terrible things we could do to Gizmo over the course of the story. So I was just curious as to whether or not at any point in the development process, were there any other darker avenues in the movie / screenplay that you ever considered going down?
Well, it had already been, the original script that Chris Columbus gave to Steven Spielberg was a horror film. And the reason Steven made it was because he wanted to make a horror film for his first movie for Amblin, because horror movies always made money. So it was a successful idea. However, when we realized how complicated it was going to be to make the movie, Steven decided he's going to have to go to a studio. And as soon as he went to Warner Brothers, obviously he wasn't going to be able to make an R-rated horror movie for a small audience. He was now going to have to make a wider audience movie. And that's when the whole idea of let's not kill the mother and bounce her head down the stairs, let's not have the gremlins eat the dog, let's not do those things. But on the other hand, there were still a lot of dark elements, and one of which, of course, is the story that Phoebe Cates talks about her father getting killed in the chimney. And that was a bone of contention in the studio for quite some time. And I remember leaving the dailies of that scene and walking back to the editing room with the editor, and she turned to me and she said, that scene's not going to be in the picture. But I loved the scene, and I thought it encapsulated the whole idea of a movie that's funny but scary, but she's telling about a horrible thing that happened to her that's horrible because it happened to her, but it's funny for us because it's ridiculous, and it's like somebody slips on a banana peel. It's funny unless you just slipped on the banana peel and broke your back. So I thought that dichotomy was all part of the movie. And so we went to this preview for the movie, and it was like so fabulous, and everybody loved it, and they were on the ceiling, and it was great. And then all of us, and then people said, well, of course we're going to cut that scene out. And I said, no, I like that scene. It's only 55 seconds, they're not going to leave. And so they said, well, we're going to get Spielberg to make you cut it. And so I went to Steven, and I said, I don't want to cut this. And he said, tell him it's your movie, and I'm not going to make you cut it, even though I don't understand it. And so it ended up in the movie. But that darkness and light is like I think one of the defining aspects of the picture, and one of the reasons why it still works.
Great question, thank you. And great cosplay, by the way. Hey, what's your name?
Hi, I'm Ryan. So I was a fan of the Police Squad TV show and the gags with that.
In color.
In color. And I was wondering, how was your experience with Leslie Nielsen, Ed North, and the Kentucky Fried guys?
Well, I already knew the Zuckers because they had shot some extra footage for Rock and Roll High School, and they had worked on Kentucky Fried Movie, of course, which was their entry to fame. And when they got their TV show, I thought, I had just gotten my DGA card, meaning that I could actually work for studios, and this is my first DGA job, which means that you do the job and they take your money. That's how it works at a guild, and I liked their brand of humor because I'd seen Airplane, of course, and I'd seen 0 Hour, the movie that they cribbed it from, and they had a real talent for taking the absurdity of a well-constructed scene and making it funny by just exaggerating it. Like in Airplane, the guy goes and he looks at he has to fly the plane, and he looks at the instrument panel and it looks like it's going on like forever. Well, in the original movie, Dana Andrews has to do that, and he has to look at the instrument panel, and it goes on for quite a while. But they copped onto it right away that if they just exaggerated it and made it keep going, it would be funnier and funnier. And so that was their ethos. And so they based Police Squad on a show called M Squad with Lee Marvin, and they literally, shot for shot, would imitate that show. And it was my first studio experience before Gremlins. I mean, this was the first time I ever been on a studio lot for Paramount. And Leslie Nielsen, who I'd grown up watching, of course, and who was who used to have a fart machine, which was a little round thing he carried around in his pocket, and he would press the button and it would go like that, and he had the body language correct, so he'd move and make it look like he'd farted, but then half the time he would play the thing, and he would point to some little girl in the elevator and say, "Her." So he did it. He was a very funny guy, but he never had much of a chance to be funny in the movies, and so for this. An Airplane, obviously, the whole idea was that his character, the doctor, was supposed to be played straight, as were Lloyd Bridges and Robert Stack and all that. They had to play the part straight in order for it to work. And Christopher Lee turned down that part in Airplane, as I turned down Airplane to direct it because I didn't understand what they were doing when I read the script. And later, everybody, oh, of course, I should have. I should have done it. Well, Leslie did it, and it was a career changer for him. I mean, he was now become a comedy star after being, you know, a leading man for so long, so many TV movies, and so many villains, and so many, you know. I mean, it was great for him. And the other actors, I was sorry that they didn't use Alan North when they did the feature versions, but. It was just a lot of fun. There were only 6 episodes. I did 3, so that was a pretty good percentage.
Special guest star Lauren Green. Hey, what's your name?
Joel. So, I mean, I don't think anybody in this room would agree with this, but I understand as a filmmaker that box office can be a barometer for success. And you, like Carpenter, financially, probably not as much during the 80s, but there's so much of you in what's popular today. Like, there's no Scream without The Howling. There's no Stranger Things without Gremlins and The Explorers, and the same thing with The Mandalorian. How do you feel about now them using what you basically created and having so much success with it now?
Well, I think more power to them. I mean, it's obviously I like that stuff, and they liked our stuff, which was based on stuff that we liked before. And I think they're just continuing that tradition of doing strange, offbeat, weird things that people like, particularly kids. And I think that in the end, people are going to be looking back at Stranger Things just the way they look back at Erie, Indiana, or you know, or Explorers, or any of those things from that period. I mean, for me, the 50s were my period that I was drawing from because that was when I was a child. But then the 80s are the new 50s for this new generation. And I think there'll always be some iteration of this kind of stuff in the future, I think.
We are just about at time, but before we go, just real quick, is there anything else you'd like to share with us? Anything on the horizon, or just any final thoughts?
Gee. I didn't know I was going to have to come up with material.
Well, no. Any projects on the docket that you could share with us?
All the projects I've got on the docket are Hoist to the Strike, Hoist to COVID,
Yeah.
Hoist to, you know, you name it. I mean, it's such a difficult period out there trying to get things made. And everything costs a fortune now. And as I said, we don't even know how people are going to see them. You know, maybe someday they'll just press a button, it'll appear inside your eyelids. I mean, nobody knows. So it's a period of real uncertainty in Hollywood, and you know, we just ride with the punches and, you know, make the best of it.
Well, whatever the future holds, we absolutely look forward to the next thing with your involvement in it. Thank you so much for joining us here this afternoon.
Thanking me.
2023. This was Joe Dante, and that was our time.